See, I'm really looking forward to this conversation actually, and to kind of ground everybody and where everyone is coming from before we tell you what our backgrounds are and where we're coming from. Just like a show of hands, how many people are actually making a living from cannabis right now? Some sort of revenue or something? Awesome. How many people are kind of like just activists or, oh, very few. Clint, of course.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so we're mostly from west coast of North America. I'm from Vancouver in British Columbia, where I help dispensaries get licensed there before legalization, and then I've been kind of slowly changing certain laws and licensing classes and things like that since legalization. We have people from California, from Arizona. I think that kind of the easiest way, I mean, obviously their bios are very impressive and they are in the program, but I'd like to just kind of start off by saying, you know, who are you advocating for and what are you advocating?
Hi, I'm Luna Stour. I'm with iSpire, and who am I advocating for? The people and the plant. I think that, you know, access, purity, wellness, this is all what we come here for. And this is so much bigger than just the plant. So as we're seeing a lot of darkness in the world right now, we really believe that plant medicine is our pathway to higher consciousness and a higher way of living. It's not just about the buzz or the medical benefits. It really is about liberation and sovereignty and autonomy, and that's, you know, the human rights issue that we're fighting for.
Hi, I'm Bridget Hennessy. I'm with Weed Maps. And who we are fighting for and what we really dive into is making sure that we have an open, diverse, and transparent cannabis economy around the world. And so we have really leaned into that and made sure that we are fighting for that every single day. And for those who are not familiar with Weed Maps, I should just quickly say we are a tech company in the cannabis space, so we don't directly touch the plant, but we are here to power the industry with and give the industry tools to perform as efficient as possible.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Cumin. I'm an attorney. I've been in the cannabis space since the late 1990s in the Bay Area is where I started. We have an office in New York, recently opened. My advocacy's changed over the years. Initially, I was advocating for medical cannabis patients. We were suing governments for, you know, discriminating against patients in California, sued federal government, sued state, county, cities. Then I got very involved in political action committee in California. We advocated for cultivators up in the Emerald Triangle. Bringing them together and formed a political action committee in Humboldt County and other places. When we brought the pack down to Los Angeles and essentially trying to organize the business community that was going to be affected by the changing laws. And so all along the way, we've been, you know, the advocacy is changing, and now ultimately the advocacy is really about fixing the broken laws that we've seen, you know, Canada and California and many other places. I know Dominic's going to talk about that a lot. And we're just trying to fix the broken laws so that we can really make sure that there's even more access, free, unhindered access to cannabis throughout the world. And that's, I think, the next big advocacy for me.
Dimitri Downing, I'm an ex-prosecutor. I got involved in the industry in 2012 in a sort of general counsel role for my brothers and my dad's dispensaries in Arizona. 2012, 2015, I studied cannabis regulations, licensing, market structures, came to some conclusions, which I found out later through my work with Normal were the wrong conclusions. Got my head on straight, started the Marijuana Trade Association of Arizona, which became known as one of the best ones in the state, intrastate siloed markets of the United States. And we evolved it into Marijuana Industry Trade Association USA, and we've been developing that over the last year. And well, we do a lot of different things: advocacy, education, business networking. But if I can leave you with one thing, we have to fight as an industry as the future members of an industry, participants in industry, employees of an industry, fight the concept of limited licensing, because that is an economic abomination that we have inherited through the good work of MPP, but inadvertently not understanding economics and market structure. Actually, they probably understood it, but just to appease those who hate cannabis, limited licensing was created, and for most people that I have met in the industry, it's not a favorable result, and it's definitely not a favorable result for the patients and the consumers. But we can talk more about that as we go. So, Dimitri Downing.
Yeah, Dimitri raises a point that I was referring to a couple of years ago at an ICBC conference with George Worth and Burkhard Bleinhardt on the stage. I said that lobbying for cannabis regulations with politicians was like playing chess with a pigeon. Doesn't really matter who wins, they're still gonna knock over all the pieces and shit all over the board. People took that as a little more pessimistic, I think, but it was very interesting, our conversation backstage, where we've all kind of talked about, we've seen such amazing progress in our lifetimes, and so many more people have access, although we've also seen things drop, like in BC, for example. There used to be better access for a lot of patients, particularly poor patients, when things were still illegal, and now that we've gotten to legalization, those things have gone backwards. And so what are some of the other things that you see that have been frustrating, and what kind of keeps you motivated to stay positive and keep moving?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the frustrations for us definitely comes from not having pathways for medicine, and that's not really a conversation anymore, right? It's recreational now. We had to pass a Senate Bill 34 just to be able to do what we were doing before, which is giving to ill people, patients, veterans. So yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of what we do. iSpire works in the hardware space. So much like Weed Maps, we don't touch the plant. We just do the hardware for the vape industry, so we can really be able to put our resources and our energy and our advocacy behind certain things that other cannabis companies cannot, because they, all the limitations that they have around banking, advertising, cash flow. So that's been a really exciting thing to be able to have ancillary, be able to come in and show up for the, the consciousness raising side, the lobbying side, the organizing side, because really there's no PR group or PSA for cannabis. No one's really arguing in her voice. It's either industry advocates or patients who want low pricing. It's not really what's best and what's in the nature of this plant. So I think that the thing that keeps me the most happy, and we talked about this backstage too, is just the networking, doing what we're doing here. It's a radical act during a time of pandemic to come out and be around other people and fight for medical autonomy and advocacy during a time of medical fascism. In a lot of ways, people are controlling everything about our medical passports and what we have access to, from food to medicine and beyond. So what keeps me feeling happy is seeing that, much like the way that the plant grows in an interconnected way in its environment, we're doing that as well, making sure that we're staying buoyant, that we're connecting with each other. We don't compete. It's not us versus each other. It's cooperation. There's enough for all of us here, and so I think that that's what gives me hope, is that despite the obvious tyranny of the government against people being as autonomous and free as possible, we're still learning from this plant. We're still allowing it to open our hearts and our minds and see that this is not like other industries. This is not a consumer packaged good. You can't just treat this like alcohol and tobacco. It's a magical, mystical, medicinal plant, and we need to start acting like it.
Yeah, I would say that when I think about it, I feel overall very optimistic, because when we start seeing legalization take place in new areas, or they're starting down this path, they are looking to the established markets and trying to understand where some of the pitfalls are. I think one of the biggest mistakes we've seen in some of the early movers was really not bringing the legacy market to the table and having their voice heard. It was a bunch of people that were trying to learn about the plant or learn about legalization from a very business setting. And so I think we're doing a better job, and I'm very hopeful that we'll continue down this path of the legacy market isn't an afterthought. We don't establish a market and establish regulations and policy and then think later like, oh, we should probably talk to the people that have been in this for 20 years in the illicit market. Like, we should be having them at the table from the outset. And I think we're seeing states like New York that actually got that and understood it and are going to implement a law that is just that. So I think overall it's hopeful, it's slow, but hopeful. I think that we're going to get there, and it's just going to take time.
And hats off to Weed Maps. They put their money where their mouth is, and that dovetails into one of the trends that I've seen in terms of success. It's businesses that integrate the advocacy that is still necessary in order to make this not only politically and socially and culturally, acceptable and get rid of stigma, but also to help create their own markets. And if you bring legacy people in and marry them correctly with your finance people, your MBAs, and you develop a working team, then I think you actually have massive success. And actually, as a side note to that, I went to a seminar. It wasn't about cannabis, but it was about someone was tracking publicly traded companies that had big budgets for lobbying and political work, and those companies actually did better, from a profit standpoint. So I mean, if you're a company and you think, well, advocacy is an afterthought, or well, we're not going to spend money on advocacy, it's a mistake, because you actually will help create your markets, and you'll build, not only build your markets and open your markets, but you'll also be able to help the larger political and social cultural goals that we're trying to achieve.
I'm going to go ahead and be a one-trick pony. I'm incredibly, the world is upside down from where it was back when Arizona and California. It's unbelievable the amount of patient access and consumer access and choice that exists now as opposed to 15, 20 years ago. But I always just want to stick to the same basic point. As a trade organization, it's everyone from a bud tender with a dream to an owner with an exit strategy. And you have to advance the rights of all those people, every employee, and their ability to one day be an owner themselves, and limited licensing, barriers to entry prevent that. And that's one of the biggest things that's happening in the cannabis industry that we as members of the cannabis industry need to advocate against and educate against. And Germany hasn't set things up yet, but if there's one thing I can leave you with, limited licensing means drug war 2.0, means prohibition 2.0. There have to be civil and criminal sanctions in place to punish these people. That's not what the members of this industry should want, advocate for, and it's not ultimately what's in the best interest of executing their hopes and their dreams, and it's not what's in the best interest of creating competition, innovation, and better products for patients and consumers. So again, being the one-trick pony, I'm extremely optimistic. I'm an ex-prosecutor. It's incredible what's happened. Unbelievable, amazing. Come to California, come to Arizona. It's beautiful, but there's a lot of work to be done, and MEDA USA is here to help do that.
Can I say something? I graduated college a long time ago. I think I'm the old guy on the panel here. You're a little behind me. And I immediately became a labor and community organizer, and over the years, I fundamentally was trained, and fundamentally my passions are about organizing. And over the years, I've just seen what happens when people come together in a small group, have an idea, and then they organize around it. And it's amazing. I mean, in the cannabis space, one of the things we did in 2009, the state of Maine came out with an ethical rule that said that lawyers couldn't represent dispensaries in Maine. And, I called up, and then the Maine Bar Association went over to Arizona, actually, and I flew to Phoenix and we met with the ACLU headquarters and a bunch of criminal defense lawyers I knew, and immediately started organizing, and we reached out to people in the Maine, in the Arizona Bar Association. We organized like crazy, and they ended up, Arizona Bar Association wrote one of the most brilliant ethics opinions that said lawyers, should be allowed, and it was really important, and because we organized, because we wrote papers, and we got law professors to help, and it is no question that you can advocate and organize to the positive results, but it does require you to sit down with people you might have a disagreement with and work out how your strategy is going to go. But it's absolutely possible. We did amazing. I was in Mississippi. We organized black woodcutters who had no money and power to change legislation in the state. I mean, anything's possible if you organize. That's basically my message.
Yeah, what we've been seeing in Canada is sort of the industry bifurcating a little into two camps, and it's interesting that, you know, Dimitri keeps bringing up the limited licensing issues that you're having in states, and it's a fundamental issue of how you approach your competition. You know, are they actually competition, or are they on your same side in the long run? And how do you encourage that in an industry that's filling up with people? You know, in Canada, in the last couple of months, we've had some stores starting to advocate to go and arrest shutting down Indigenous stores without any idea of what their sovereignty is like, or, you know, anything like that. And that's something that, while we've been seeing that happen, large producers are getting away without even getting fines or anything. And it's like, we don't want to see anybody go to jail, but if you're going to have rules, you should follow the rules. Obviously, Indigenous stores fall under a different category because we still haven't figured out exactly what that sovereignty looks like. But how does that issue strike you? How do you build those bridges, or do we just wait until they're all pushed out, all the people that don't want to work with anybody else?
I mean, I think in my role at Weed Maps, we've had to deal with this a lot because we were supportive of the legacy industry. We've been around for 15 years. And so when places like California started moving to an adult use model and started to regulate, we had really hard conversations with our clients, and we had to be open with the fact that, you know, we are going to push for a very open market, and some of you guys are going to feel really uncomfortable with that because we want to see everybody win here. We don't want to see just 5 or 10 companies winning the entire industry. And we often will be at odds with our clients. We're sort of unapologetic about it at this point. We treat it very diplomatically. We will go in and have that hard conversation, and we'll hear them out and hear their point of view and try to explain, you know, we look at the data. We can tell you that the data is there to say there's plenty of demand for the industry. So everybody's going to do well, that we all have to work together with one voice. It takes time, and people have to start building trust, but I think the relationship building, having honest conversations, looking at the data, you can get there. It's a work in progress all the time, and we will lose some relationships over that, but you have to be okay and know that you're heading the right direction the whole time.
And remember what we were talking about, you know, government is the enemy. Government deserves the black market it creates through its restrictions and through its limited licensing. And it's winning. We're winning all the time because whatever we can't organize well enough to create and get rid of these restrictions, well, then the consumers are going to go get their cannabis in the black market. And that's just the way it is. It's going to always be that way. It's going to be that way in Germany. It's been that way in Europe, and it's going to continue to be that way. So we win. The plant wins either way. It gets out there. And I was always telling my legacy, you know, my clients up in the Emerald Triangle, I said, you guys, you know, you planted the seeds of your own demise because the consumers saw that little green bud from California and they went crazy around the world for it. And that's, you know, part of what happened. But it's on fire now. There's no going back.
Yeah, to your point about Northern California exporting all of our cool, something really interesting that I want to mention too that makes sense in Europe because of the appellations of origin for wine. You'll notice that you can't call something champagne unless it's from the Champagne region, Bordeaux. So something that Frenchie Cannoli, the late great Hashishin, who is no longer with us, but always was talking about the terroir and the place, the spirit of the soil, the air, the water, the genetics, and the love that the people in Northern California put into it through regenerative farming and the energetics of really working with a plant that they know that they're making for medicine and having decades and decades and generations of people doing that work. I think that that's something that can really set folks apart. You can't just put Cali on a Mylar bag and call it Cali and have people, you know, believe that. I think that that's something that can help us as far as cooperation goes, is really finding other people that have the same message. You know, at iSpire, something as simple as when we do our dab bars, we always have a concentrate sponsor that has a mission that we relate to. You know, we always have, you know, another, you know, Dynavap is another partner that technically is a competitor, but we're partners now. We use each other's, you know, induction heating for their Dynavap piece, or the dip device folks. Like, it doesn't have to be limiting. It's not, we're larger than the sum of our parts. And I think that once we start seeing people come together and use common language, that's the one one thing I really want to say to the Europeans out here trying to legislate and trying to move this forward is, you know, talk to each other, get on the same page. A lot of what happened with us in California was we did a lot of sloppy infighting right in front of the legislators, and it was really bad. It allowed for Philip Morris and some of these bigger players that the no acreage caps came in and just decimated us because they came in their suits. They were really buttoned up, they were really respectable, they spoke the same language, and we look like a bunch of wild, wacky hippies that were infighting. So I think that that's the biggest thing that I've seen is utilizing trade organizations like MITA, talking to these, you know, people that you think are your enemies. Like Matt said, you know, these people are on your side. Having that hard conversation now is going to save you a lot of pain from down the road when you're trying to undo some of this stuff. So I think that knowing what you have, knowing that what you grow, what you make is really special, and finding other people that are in it for the long haul, not folks that are exit focused, that are just in here to make a quick buck, green rush it, and bounce. That's not what we're here for, so just be on the lookout for real family and stick with them.
Yeah, and I think that it gets a little overwhelming. I know certainly did in Canada, where it suddenly was the mining companies throwing around stocks and millions of dollars, and it can get a little discouraging, especially because then it makes it harder for the legitimate people to do money and raises and things like that. But we're already starting to see that kind of fade out. Like, those companies can't keep running the way they're running, not forever. Now that we've gotten smaller license classes and things like that, and people have had time to transition that maybe weren't able to transition right away into the legacy and into the legal market from the legacy market, it does get better eventually, but it's hard. You know, you said something backstage that is exactly as the insult to injury of telling a jurisdiction this is what's going to happen, and then watching them do it again anyway, and it gets very frustrating to see that happen again and again. But you know, on the positive side, the more optimistic outlook is that we do come through the other side eventually, and we're starting to get there in the West Coast, for example. I mean, you guys are going to have issues again when you get to federal legalization, because it's, you know, the more you try to appease a bigger group of people, the worse things ultimately get in the long run for the people that know what's going on. Dimitri, I noticed you've been taking notes frantically.
I'm just taking notes for myself and later.
No. What?
No, well, I mean, again, you know, I'm going to be a one-trick pony. You have to do whatever you can to fight limited licensing. It creates so many of the problems. Our friends turning each other in. We know the ruthlessness in the games that are played. It makes no economic sense. It's an abomination. Even if you're opening up a nuclear power plant, you can go get a license, you pay for it, and then if you break the rules, they take away your permit. Limited licensing, merit-based licensing, deciding who has the right to retail, manufacture, dispense, grow, all that stuff. It creates a Minority Report reality. Remember that movie with Tom Cruise, where the government is trying to guess who's going to do things right or who's going to commit crimes? That's exactly what we're doing. And God bless the MPP, I love them. They inadvertently did this. They should have never attached manufacturing and cultivation. Had they had some sort of economic theorist working with them, they wouldn't have. But it's a tragedy that we're repeating over and over again. And countries like, you know, maybe even Germany, I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know what the lobbying situation is and the special interest situation is. But people are looking at the United States and say, how did they do it there? And this devil exists. That, you know, it's damaging all kinds of things, even the legacy market. Okay, the legacy market, if it wasn't for such restrictive limited licensing, could get involved. You know, yeah, sure, they have to dot more I's and cross more T's and follow more rules, but it's impossible for them to even get started. In social equity in Arizona, we had 4,000 people go through, and God bless Weed Maps for sponsoring us. I have to mention they sponsored that program. 4,000 people get educated. They self-identified as social equity entrepreneurs that wanted to be involved in the cannabis industry. They're competing for 26 licenses. 1,500 were determined eligible through a series of state determinations as to what social equity is. Okay, fine. 1,500 paid $4,000. 26 of them got licenses. So what does that mean? That means about 4,000 people that were motivated to get off their ass and do something and push for their hopes and their dreams and opportunity in cannabis is what cannabis should be about, not just patients and consumers and therapy and all that stuff, but also about a free market of opportunity. All those were crushed. All those were crushed because of the concept of limited licensing. I'd rather see those 4,000 people go get a piece of paper, screw things up, get their license revoked, fail. That's what cannabis should be about. And I hear over and over again in different countries and different states throughout the world, what did Colorado do? How did this work? What did that work? And the problem is limited licensing. This notion needs to die.
You know, in Canada, we had barriers that ended up being very similar to that came about just from, oh, you have to have this and this and this in the facility, and you have to have this in the facility. And then because there were so many people that were just saying, hey, we applied for a license, so we're now listed on a stock market, buy our stock, there was so much of that right when we were allowing smaller producers in, Health Canada said, okay, you've got to actually have a building first before we're even going to look at you. So then all of these smaller producers and people that, you know, especially people from the former illicit market that didn't know if they were going to get security cleared, couldn't necessarily build out those facilities to that level. And to take a side tangent here, because I've been using the word, even though it's a pet peeve of mine, is I hate the word legacy market. Because legacy is something you leave to somebody when you're dead. And the black market hasn't gone anywhere. It's still here, it's still strong in Canada, it's still strong in California, right?
Thriving. Actually
Yes.
going up. So.
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting thing to kind of watch happen, especially when the government's, you know, in Canada, one of their main approaches was, well, we want to transition the illicit market, but then you only saw that in basically BC. Every other province wanted to try and wipe it out and replace it, right? And so I had a question in there somewhere. I think it was Bridget, you had brought up before about how important it is to fight for equity and amnesty, and that kind of touches on some of these barriers and artificial barriers that are being raised to the industry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that everybody says, you know, you'll hear it again and again in states or in different jurisdictions that are legalizing, and they'll say they're doing it to right the wrong from the war on drugs or whatever. But we're not actually doing that. I mean, if you look, California is a great example of what not to do in this area, because they did a lot of talking about social equity and making sure that there was room in the market for people. There was no clear definition in the policy. It was every jurisdiction gets to decide how they're going to define it and how they're going to give out those licenses. And there's no access to capital. So we're going to give people this space. We're going to say, you know, the city of Los Angeles, for instance, said you have to have the property in possession before you can apply for a license. And then they took 2.5 years to go through the first phase of licensing while people paid rent on that property. How does somebody who has zero to very little capital even get in there and do that? So we've been fighting for that. We are trying to call this out as often as we can. And I do feel hopeful in places like New York where they're leading with the social equity licenses. Those are going first. They're getting a head start. It's still not perfect. There's still gonna be a lot of room for improvement, and we have a fight ahead for us. But we're finally starting to think about it the right way and think about, like, not only do we give them licensing first, but like, how do we help them build successful businesses that can compete with the well-capitalized, that can compete with the companies that have been around for decades and they're multi-state operators, or, you know, they're operating all over the globe. We want to make sure that there's room for the mom and pop shops to be in the market. And so I think we need to continue to call that out. I think limited licensing on every level is one of those problems as well. And quite frankly, you're just propping up the illicit market by limiting on any level of that. So I think we need to continue to call that out, make sure that people are thinking through that as they design policy.
Yeah, these are law school habits. I write stuff down. Yeah, you know, and you know, again, countries like Germany and the regulators stuff, I hope that Germans do their own thing and invent a market model and say, hey, you know what, Colorado, you guys screwed things up. You guys didn't give enough people opportunity. You guys left the legacy market out. You guys left social equity out by not allowing for free market capitalism to triumph and for people to succeed or fail based on their own merits. access to capital is a huge problem. And there's other groups that have come up with this. It's not well, I came up with it on my own, but they came up with that on their own as well. You know, there's an easy way to solve the social equity issue. You know, less barriers to entry, allow all the social equity, whoever wants to self-define as social equity to participate, and then create funds with the taxes that are generated so that they can have access to capital to take out low interest like loans from SBA type programs if you want to help social equity status individuals. And that's great, and that, you know, I support that. But to have people go through a merit-based process to determine that they're social equity eligible, that's really tough. I guess, you know, even in a capital, even in a loan structure, they're going to have to do that. But again, if I can say one thing, let's kill limited licensing in cannabis.
Yeah, it's diversity, right? Isn't that what you want in any ecosystem, is diversity?
Yes, and a couple of points. I wrote a short little piece for that interesting little software, the Hoover, is that what they call it? Just on Dominic's, you know, saw here, which I agree with completely. The other thing, just talking about advocacy and how to do it, maybe because, you know, we're David to Goliath. You know, but David won, you know, and I know we're winning. I know we're going to win this, and it's going to be painful, and there's going to be a lot of baton passing. I mean, I've got, you know, my two daughters are, you know, activists, and I've got the baton handing over to them, and a lot of young people that I mentor and bring along. You know, there's a lot of organizing tips out there. You know, when we went up to Humboldt, you know, the cannabis farmers up there were terrified, and we actually brought them in, and they were going to the PTA meetings, and they couldn't tell their teachers, you know, what they did for a living, the kids' teachers, and we brought them in by creating a stakeholder process. You know, so we went and we went to the Rotary Club, and can we have your monthly luncheon meeting be about cannabis up here, and you know, business people in Humboldt County, and it turned out we had allies everywhere. We have allies in so many places, but they're afraid. They're a little bit afraid because of the stigma. But when you start to create a forum, or fora, whatever the plural is, you know, for people to come into a room and start talking and communicating, it's amazing what happens. And that's what happened up in Humboldt. You know, we had a 16-month campaign that was kicked off at a Rotary Club meeting in October of 2014, and by January of 2016, which was really fast if you talk to political people, we had an ordinance in place that was progressive, that had environmental concerns. Yes, the state screwed up. They allowed stacking of licenses, and they wiped out, you know, farmers, and not that the farmers knew what they were doing, how to get into the space or branding, and that's a whole other separate conversation. But the point is that you can organize using stakeholder groups. You bring in you bring everybody into the room, and you'll find your allies. They will emerge. They're in the political world. They're just afraid, but you give them a place to speak as an organizing tool. That's really powerful. You know, create places that you wouldn't think to go to. The Rotary Club, the whatever it is, you know, they're out there. There's all these places, and they're all interested in cannabis.
We all have veterans. Every country has veterans of war, and all of them have PTSD and physical pain, and almost all of them are being prescribed opiates right now. So that's one thing also, just like as we're diversifying our voices, one thing I've noticed is the only people advocating for cannabis is usually business people. If I was a legislator and I saw business people coming to advocate for cannabis, I would not trust them. I would think that they were just doing it to do business. Unfortunately, what we've seen in California is that the patients don't come out and lobby with us. When we go to the city council meetings until 1 in the morning on a Tuesday night, in the middle of the night, it's all business people. It's not convincing. And I think that that's something we need to really think about is that with these stakeholder meetings, how many business people in here have actually held a stakeholder meetings beyond maybe a focus group for early stage branding, market research? Like, who's really getting people together? If we're saying we're all fighting for these people, where are these people? Are they at the old folks' home? Like in Berkeley, you know, or in the Bay Area, we had Sue Taylor who was bringing it into old folks' homes, and they were able to get topical rubs with cannabis. I mean, these are things that had to go into the community, talking to school teachers, how are we doing this work? I mean, really ask yourself, like, how are you really talking to the end consumer and having them talk back to the legislators? We cannot do it alone. There's way too few of us. We're in the minority. The majority of people are either neutral or uncomfortable around cannabis. Other business people, we're all busy, right? I don't know about you guys, but I've been working 90-hour weeks for the last 2 years without a break, just with iSpire, and before that, it's like 6-7 years in the cannabis industry with no breaks. This is a crisis where this is not a game to us. Like, there are people dying every day. There are people rotting in jail who are a lot darker skinned than me for doing a lot less than what I do every day and get applauded for. So this is like, we don't have time. We don't have many resources, but we have the love and the organizing and the networking and leaning into that and that diversity. I mean, they say this with women too. It's like, having more people in the business is not just a feel-good move. You actually, objectively, in the data, have better innovation, more disruptive technology, and even the same thing with like women and people of color in the workspace. It's not just so you can feel good that there's chicks on your team. Women and people of color provide incredible insights that build out the end result for your consumer, and you sell better. Love is lucrative. That's what we have to remember. The love is lucrative. But how are we going to actually organizing it together? To your point, stakeholders are rarely in the room with us. We have a lot of these conversations in these kind of silos, and it's an echo chamber. So, I really invite you guys to talk to the soccer moms, go to the places where they're focused on wine and cocaine, at the club, when I'm out there, when I'm out in the back dabbing and everyone's railing lines, and start a conversation, be like, this is what I do, this is my plant medicine, this is how I integrate it. I talk about the cannabis industry to people who are not in the industry all the time. Because the best way to stop the war on drugs, from making more veterans of the war on drugs, is to stop making the laws that criminalize it. And every person who's a voting person has a voice in that. So just like he said, this is not about industry. This is a movement, a mass movement for medical freedom. And go through the world talking like that. You are a conduit of this social and physical and emotional change that we're all going through, and you should be very, very, very proud of what you do and be very forward about what you do. I'm a public school teacher. I still have my credential in English in California. I could go back and teach it anytime. I made a choice to openly be in cannabis, and I'm proud when former students reach out to me. They're always stoked to see what I'm doing. My parents are proud of me. Does it make sense for someone with a master's in teaching to be slanging weed at an international level? Maybe not on paper, but the change that I'm making in my life and the amount of times that I've been scared to move forward in this space, and the universe has shown me that this is the right path. We're just here to show you that we've been through a decade of absolute hell. It's like being in an abusive relationship with someone. You know that this industry is only going to keep harming you. You show up every day loving it unconditionally. If we can do it, you guys can absolutely do it, and we are totally here for you every step of the way as you guys roll this out. All of our pain, all of our suffering that we've gone through, you're not going to have to go through it again if we have anything to do with it.
If I may,
Matt and I are looking at each other like a decade. That'd be nice.
and if anybody needs me for any reason, there's a ton of examples as to why limited licensing is a failure and why extensive licensing is a success. Anyone who ever says, oh, the Oklahoma industry sucks, that's just somebody who couldn't compete and couldn't win and who expected too much and wanted to keep prices of cannabis too high. But if I may say one thing, because we are in Germany, and I am reminded that in 1945, the peace was made, and they thought it was a good idea to divide up, into four, actually it's more than 4 sections, like 5, 6, 7, but famously 4 sections, United States, France, etc. And it took until 1991 to unify and get that right, and let the people of Germany come together as one. Maybe they had to be taught a lesson, I don't know, but we know that Germany is a great united country now, and think about that, 45 years. So again, if I can leave you with one thing, I was listening to how the stakeholders meetings were happening with the parliamentarians this summer, and that work has happened already here. And one of the individuals was telling me that there was not one person who was advocating for prohibition. That's great. So we don't need to talk about that anymore. We need to talk about let's kill limited licensing. Let's talk about that, because it's about the market structure, and you do not want to wait 45 years to get that right the next time.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Is we've been talking about talking, but the other really important piece is listening and knowing when to change your message. Because a lot of the early success I had is I was coming into these meetings where medical cannabis advocates would be expounding all the benefits of medical cannabis to a city councilor who doesn't really. Whether he believes you or not, it doesn't matter. That's not part of his job. That's not something that's going to get him somewhere. Once you kind of show them, hey, look, this is what happened in all these cities in California, and these guys regulated early, and they've got no problems, and they're improving their industry all the time, and these guys tried to fight it and got hit with 10,000 lawsuits, and and then as soon as they see something like that, that triggers somewhere. So it's it's important to know your audience and the message. And speaking of which, are there any questions in the audience? Isn't Guy here?
Nico's got the microphone. Let's hear it from the panel.
Yeah.
Last round for questions this year.
I think this question is maybe primarily for Dimitri, but maybe for the whole panel. What do you think of what's going on in New Mexico, your neighbor, which has seemingly adopted the opposite of a limited licensing framework? You mentioned Oklahoma, but just curious about New Mexico and other models, what they've done right and what they can do better.
Well, let me give you an example. I think it's great. For a simple question, it's great. Anything that's better, anything that moves away from limited licensing and more opportunity is better than not. But let me give you an example in Arizona, what we have going on right now. We have brands that are migrating into these intrastate models. And right now, we have all these brands coming in from Oklahoma that have successfully competed and won against 300 other gummy lines. And the businessmen know that these brands have shown some sort of success with the consumers and patients that is desirable. So they are more likely to take them in than a brand from Arizona who doesn't, just is competing against 25 other gummy lines. So anywhere there's more competition, you're going to find a better marketplace. This is simple economics. It's just something that we've adopted and that's been replicated over and over again because people are like, what do they do in Colorado? What do they do in Colorado? What are they doing? And then they keep up. So we need to stop this domino effect at some point, and somebody's going to get it right. If I was the German chancellor in charge of, is there a chancellor? Yeah. If I was in charge of Germany, I would say, we want to be the best. We want competition. We want innovation. We want to be known globally as the best cannabis manufacturers or cultivators. I know it's Northern Europe, so it's a little different, but at least manufacturers, product producers anywhere. We're going to create a free market, and we're going to teach the Americans what a free market is, because you guys didn't get it right over there in the United States, but we are going to get it right. So I like New Mexico, if you want.
Can I just add to that? One of the things that I think New Mexico did really well while they were drafting their legislation is they did a thorough scan of what not to do. And we had multiple conversations with the legislative members that were drafting the law, and they knew that we had a lot of data around the industry, and we would set up these working sessions for hours, and they would ask us for data, we would dig it up, we would find it. We would pull pieces of law that we thought, okay, New Jersey got this section right. We got this right in Washington. They looked at everything and then tried to do the best that they could do to start it out. They also have, since legalizing, have realized they made some mistakes and they're already going back to fix it next January. So I think they've gone in eyes wide open, and we're really open to hearing what worked and hasn't worked across the United States.
Smart.
And just the idea that, talk to the legislators. Go call them up. They have staff people.
They listen. They really listen. When you blow up their offices, they have meetings about you. Cannabis people being loud is the only reason you even know the word California here.
And bring along a medical cannabis patient. I mean, I hate to be cynical sounding, but I mean, every time we did a lawsuit on behalf of medical cannabis patients, we got someone in a wheelchair, we put people up right in front and made sure that the community and that everybody saw what was going on. That this was about access for people who needed to use cannabis for whatever reason, but we gave them some really compelling reasons.
There's some nuances that are really wrong, as Bridget was saying, with New Mexico, but in general, heading in that direction is a great idea. So it's not perfect.
Hi, right up here. Hey, great conversation here in Berlin. So great to be back. And it's very lucky for the Germans to hear these insights because it's all very similar to what they're going to be going through. So we didn't have that when we started, but I wanted to talk about education because I think a lot of the things that could be solved, because we did education much later, Jamie knows we did a bunch of education together. Wouldn't it be nice if everyone just consolidated education? And I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on, is there a way that we can just help educate, work together to make one Bible of education to share around the world, which will make all of our jobs easier? Any thoughts on that?
I'm gonna do a shameless plug right now.
Do it.
WMpolicy.com. We have been gathering data. We have papers from different thought leaders. We have a bunch of policy papers. And you can also put in requests where we are pulling as much as we can from the industry, making sure that we have best practices there. Check it out, but this is something that has been a labor of love for the last 5 years, and I think we have done a good job of gathering a lot of the information of lessons learned. WMpolicy.com.
Weed maps, WM for weed maps. We're also seeing, actually, when you talk about education, we're actually seeing some of the community colleges and law schools actually having curriculum now. And well, where they really need curriculum is in the medical schools because, they did surveys and medical students aren't taught about the endocannabinoid system. And so, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's curriculum, people developing curriculum for actually, for higher education. They won't let us get into the grammar schools and the elementary schools and the high schools, but we can go into the community colleges and law schools and universities, and that I think is, again, it's a long process.
But and I think this is a piecemeal approach that Alex is trying to avoid because, in Canada, so I taught one of the first courses at a university level on dispensaries, but then there was multiple other ones that were written, and the laws were being changed at the time, and there was no uniform approach, and we've seen it particularly affect our pharmacies. Pharmacies were asked if they wanted to be part of the medical program before legalization, and none of them wanted to touch it. And then after recreational legalization, all the pharmacies wanted to jump on board and started saying we're the only ones that should be prescribing it, but they still didn't bother to teach anybody about the endocannabinoid system. And the pharmacological colleges were still like, no, doctors' colleges, they don't want to hear it, and they're still anti-cannabis, which is mind-boggling, but here we are in 2022, right?
Here we are.
Just one thing. I would want to say, did anybody else notice that if you look closely at those lights, they're green and red?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
It's
I
very
noticed that
tricky.
too.
Very tricky.
That is awesome.
I thought maybe that was like having a flashback or something.
That was,
It's good to have the ceiling here in the reggae colors. Let's hear it from the panel one more time.